Thank you both. Mr. Kelly, and going to 5-minute rounds.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my comments or my questions would be directed likely to Mr. Leswick, and in part in reaction to some of what you had said in response to an earlier question, but more to what the minister had said in his remarks. He talked about the debt to GDP level and how low the federal debt to GDP was in Canada, then compared it to other jurisdictions like the United States and G7 countries. Is that really a proper comparison, given that in the United States, for example, almost all significant social program expenditure, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, etc., they have a federal Department of Education and other services are funded federally, to then not include provincial debt in that calculation and compare those two countries. What do you know, and can you tell the committee what the debt to GDP level of all government debt, including Crown Corporation debt, which is important to consider as well?
Indeed. Thank you for the question, because it helps establish clarification. So the statistic the minister quotes is an internationally comparable statistic. In other words, there are various adjustments made by the IMF and OECD to establish a common comparison of debt between countries, and one of those adjustments is indeed the fact that we would add the value of provincial and territorial government debt into our debt metric. Likewise, U.S. and other G7 countries would add their sub-sovereign levels of government into their debt metric as well. So it is on a comparable basis. Extending a little bit further, though, because the dynamics of government are so different in terms of how we, for instance, fund our social security schemes, like, we contribute assets into the CPP, QPP, whereas other jurisdictions just throw those premiums into their national revenues. It does become, quite a set of adjustments. I'm just saying that just quite objectively in terms of
to actually make apples to apples comparisons.
To try and make apples to apples, exactly. So the IMF and OECD do this gymnastics, and then they publish this on a quarterly basis in order to update those comparisons.
Right, and this business, and he reacted quite a bit to my colleague Mr. Albus on this issue of total Crown debt in the $1 trillion, and you pointed out that it's the necessity of delineating these two numbers, and yet the government has used the concern over this total debt in its housing policy, which has resulted in many taking home ownership out of the hands of many Canadians in many markets that are not of the concern of the department. So it sounded almost like having it both ways. I mean, the total debt number is, if that's what policy is going to be driven from, including housing policy, then ought that not to be the total debt number you use?
The total debt numbers we are using is mostly it's as a result of the new borrowing authority framework that the government put in place in 2017. So the objective was to be more transparent, and therefore we wanted to include all our debt. So all the debt that the government needs to finance on the market, that include the Crown Corporation debt. That's why right now we're talking about a number of $1 trillion. We got a borrowing authority in 2017 for the next 3 years of $1.168 billion, and it's because of increased transparency that we're referring to that number right now.
I'm finished.
Then back to